Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. So today is 19th July 2024, Friday, and today we have some important articles from different newspapers. So all these articles that we are going to discuss in this present session are very important, and therefore we will try to analyze them and discuss them in a very detailed manner. So the overall objective is that you have to understand everything in a very clear manner regarding these articles. And before actually discussing these articles, let's try to answer the yesterday given practice question. You all knew that yesterday I was given one practice question that was with respect to the missile defense systems of different countries. The question is, which of the following air defense systems are correctly matched, right? So the first, Iron Dome, Israel, okay, and apart from that, S-400 missile defense system, Russia, THAAD, USA, and Iron Beam, India, right? So if you look at the Iron Dome is very often in news because Hamas and other militant groups have been regularly attacking Israel, right? So through missiles, regularly attacking Israel. So Israel is protected by the Iron Dome, right? So this is a missile defense system that was developed by Israel to protect Israel from the enemy air strikes. So therefore Iron Dome is absolutely correct because it belongs to Israel. And S-400 missile defense system so also belong to Russia, right? So it also belonged to Russia, and India recently purchased S-400 missile defense systems from Russia as well, and THAAD, terminal high altitude air defense system, so that also belonged to USA. But on the other hand, Iron Dome doesn't belong to India. Iron Beam, so this Iron Beam also belong to Israel. So therefore only 1, 2, 3 is the correct answer for this question, right? So Iron Dome belong to Israel, Iron Beam also belong to Israel, S-400 missile defense system of Russia, THAAD belong to USA, right? So however, on the other hand, advanced air defense system belong to India, right? So these are different air defense systems, and they are one of the powerful air defense systems across the world, in fact. So today also I have given one very important question, and with respect to BIMSTEC and SAARC, Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, and SAARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. So we have already discussed about this BIMSTEC and SAARC also. The question is, which of the following countries which are given here are the members of BIMSTEC and SAARC? So the statements, the countries are Myanmar, Bhutan, Maldives, and Sri Lanka. So you have to answer that which of the following countries, you have to understand this, not the members of both BIMSTEC and SAARC, right? So what are the countries? They are not members of both BIMSTEC and SAARC. So try to answer this question, and I'll give you the correct answer in tomorrow's class. And let's start our discussion with the first very important article. The article is, over 800 elephants died in Kerala in 8 years. In the last 8 years, 800 elephants, and in fact it is one of the highest mortality rates for elephants in Kerala. So we will understand what are the reasons for the increased mortality of these elephants, and what are the measures that we need to undertake to protect elephants and their habitat, so that this mortality rate can be prevented or minimized over a period of time. So conservation and involving the local communities in the conservation efforts of elephants, protecting elephant habitats and elephant corridors, all these things are very important. So we will understand gradually. So first we'll try to understand the reasons for the increased death rate of elephants in Kerala in last 8 years. Right, so the context is that Kerala forest has recorded that 845 elephant deaths between 2015-2023. I mean, 845 elephant death is not a small number. In fact, it is one of the highest number of elephant mortalities. So therefore, studies have been indicating that there is an increasing trend of death of elephants across India, and that has to be identified. The cause of increasing death of or increasing mortality of elephants has to be identified. Now when we talk about this, the younger elephants, particularly those under 10 years of age, so they have been facing a number of challenges, especially now when we talk about the death rate or the mortality rate in younger elephant is approximately 40%. It is highest rate among the younger elephants. Now when we talk about the most common reason which causing the mortality of elephants is a disease that is known as elephant endotheliotrophic herpes viruses hemorrhagic diseases. So this is also known as EEHV disease. Okay, so this disease is elephant endotheliotrophic herpesvirus hemorrhagic disease, and this disease is the most common reason for the increasing mortality among the elephants. Now we will understand why elephants are important. Now elephants are very often considered as keystone species. Now what are these keystone species in an ecosystem? We need to understand the role that the keystone species such as elephants can actually play in protecting the environment, protecting the ecosystem. So what are these keystone species? Keystone species are those species. So if we add species into the ecosystem, or if we remove the species into the ecosystem, that would lead to the catastrophic changes in that particular ecosystem. So that is the basic definition of keystone species. For example, here in Kerala forest, the increasing mortality of elephants have been leading to the loss of elephants from the ecosystem. So that will lead to the major changes in the occurrence of at least one or other species. For example, if elephant number declines, elephant population declines, so it would also impact other population of other species, right? So populations of other species will also be impacted by the reducing or declining number of elephants, and that is the keystone species. And in fact, so if keystone species is lost, and that is what happening in Kerala, so it will result in degradation of the whole ecosystem. So it will result in the degradation of whole ecosystem, and that is why it is one of the most serious and most pressing concern. And in fact, these keystone species are also considered as a very important species in determining the presence of many other species in that particular ecosystem. So they actually decide the presence of many other species in that particular ecosystem, and that's why these keystone species are considered as a very important, because they determine the presence of many other species in that particular ecosystem, right? So this is very, very important. You try to understand the concept of keystone species. Now it is very simple that, you know, in an ecosystem, one species depends on other species. For example, we human beings, so we require food, right? So we require food, but for the pollination of crops, bees play a very important role. So if bees population reduces or declines, so that will impact the food security, and lesser food impact the human beings, right? So in an ecosystem, one species is dependent on the other species, and these keystone species or the species, if the number of such species declines, then it would impact the numbers of other species also. So it would lead to the collapse of entire ecosystem or degradation of the entire ecosystem. So elephant is one of the keystone species. Now we will understand the elephant herds. Now elephants, whenever we see elephants, so very often these elephants usually roam in groups. So that phenomenon is known as herd, elephant herd. Okay, so calves in larger herds, so they exhibit better survival rates due to the shared immunity of the particular elephant herd, because when these young calves are in the larger elephant herds, so they would be exposed to various strains, various disease causing strains within that larger herd, and that would enable these young calves to develop antibodies. So when they develop antibodies for different disease causing strains, so they could be able to withstand a different diseases, right? So they can even effectively combat this particular elephant endotheliotropic herpes viruses hemorrhagic disease as well. So therefore that would particularly enhances the survival rate of these elephants. But nowadays we also see elephants rarely roaming in the larger herds, and that also contributing to the increasing mortality of the elephants. However, there is a need to restore natural habitats. So we need to restore the natural habitats of these elephants. Nowadays, the degradation of the natural habitats also taking place in the forest areas because of the various anthropogenic factors, right? For example, deforestation, developmental projects, infrastructure projects across these forest areas. Now what has been happening? The forest areas, the habitats of elephants are fragmented. So elephants need to have a huge a forest land for the migration. So they regularly migrate from one place to another place, and they require a huge forest land. But what we are doing, we are fragmenting these forest areas either by deforestation or by infrastructure projects that are developed across these forest areas. So immediate need is we must restore the natural habitats of the elephants, and we should also check the fragmentation of elephant herds. So it is very important that these young calves are very often roaming in the large elephant herds, so that they can develop the immunity, so they could develop the antibodies, so that would help in fighting against this EEHV disease. Okay, so that is how we can ensure the higher survival rate of Asian elephants in the region. Now when we talk about elephant herd sizes, they are found to shrink. Their numbers have been declining. Now we rarely see elephants roaming in groups, right? So that is known as herd, but we rarely see as of now elephants roaming in herds. So elephant herd sizes have been found to shrink significantly because of the suboptimal habitats of these elephants, where the fodder availability is severely constrained. So all these factors have been making that elephants are not roaming in large herds, rather they are roaming individually or smaller groups. So that has been increasing their susceptibility to these new diseases. They are not able to develop antibodies for these new diseases. However, we must understand the current trends or current threats in the elephant mortality rate. So what are the major threats that these elephants have been facing? Now when we talk about the threats, a shrinking elephant habitat is one of the most common threat that elephants have been facing. Now when we talk about shrinking habitat, so it takes place because of the deforestation. Deforestation is the one reason for the shrinking habitat, and development of infrastructure projects across these forest areas would be another major reason for the shrinking habitats, and even encroachment of the forest land is another factor. Encroachment of the forest land is another factor for shrinking forest lands. And apart from that, the shrinking habitat of elephants further leading to the fragmentation of these habitats, and that is further increased by the phenomenon of climate change as well. However, there are number of factors which have been contributing to this susceptibility to new diseases, right? So these factors have been increasing the vulnerability of elephants to various diseases. For example, declining their population sizes. When the population sizes are declining, they don't roam in herds, right? So when they roam in herds, they would be exposed to the diverse number of disease causing strains, and that could enable these young calves to develop antibodies against those particular diseases. However, declining population size increases the vulnerability of elephants, and sensitivity to higher temperatures. In recent times, we have seen the higher temperatures or heat wave like conditions, and this also increasing the vulnerability of elephants to newer diseases. And even the alien invasive species is also another major threat that all other species, particularly elephants, have been facing. Now, when we talk about the invasive alien species, so if they are deliberately or unintentionally introduced in one particular ecosystem, so they take advantage and they started growing rapidly in that particular ecosystem. However, one thing we must understand is that these invasive alien species are not native to that particular ecosystem, and therefore these elephants generally don't feed on these invasive alien species. So since there is no predator for these invasive alien species, their numbers would multiply rapidly. So that is the problem with the invasive alien species. So when their numbers would multiply rapidly, they dominate the native ecosystem, and that's how these invasive alien species make the other animal species don't have food, particularly elephant. Right, so invasive alien species are also disrupting the food sources, and it also increases the sensitivity of elephants to new diseases. However, so there are several critical variables which have been influencing the elephant distribution patterns across Indian forests. For example, land use changes have been taking place in recent times at a rapid pace, and water balance and temperature fluctuations and disturbances, so which are majorly due to the anthropogenic factors. Now all these factors are also influencing the survival rate of these elephants. These factors also increasing the susceptibility and vulnerability of elephants to newer diseases, and that has to be dealt with properly. However, so when we talk about the way forward, so the way forward essentially in for example, when we talk about the other threats that the elephants have been facing, the human wildlife conflict is another major thing which has been leading to the death and mortality of these elephants. So that has to be dealt with. Before, we have just discussed that a few days before, we just discussed that there should be some biofences and bee fences that should be constructed that will minimize the human wildlife conflict. So however, when we talk about the way forward, so we must understand the causes of increased mortality of elephants, right? So there is a need for the systematic approach to understand and mitigate the elephant death that has been taking place. However, there should be a framework, and that particular framework should facilitate a comprehensive investigation into the actual causes of elephant deaths. Now, what are the causes of elephant deaths? And that would help identify the patterns and assess threats, and even implement the targeted conservation measures so that we could save the keystone species population such as elephants, because keystone species are very important species in an ecosystem. So they decide the prevalence or survival of other species in that particular ecosystem. So keystone species plays a very important role in maintaining the biodiversity of one particular area. So next important article that we are going to discuss is about India's strategic autonomy, and this strategic autonomy that India has been, we can say that India is a master in utilizing this strategy, this strategic autonomy, in a perfect manner, right? So when we talk about the strategic autonomy, it essentially means that India's foreign policy is essentially guided by its own national interest. India will not be part of any alliances, any military alliances. India's foreign policy will not be influenced by any external factors. Any external factors in the sense that, for example, US cannot influence India's foreign policy. So India's foreign policy is essentially an independent foreign policy. So that is strategic autonomy. So we could maintain friendly ties with both East and West. So when I say East, so it includes Russia, and West it includes Europe and US. So Russia cannot influence India's ties with the West, and US and Europe cannot influence India's ties with the Russia. So because we have the policy of strategic autonomy, and this strategic autonomy is based on India's sole national interest. So we will understand the context of this particular article. The context is that India's recent diplomatic maneuvers, right? So the diplomatic moves, so particularly Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent visit to Russia in the middle of ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. So that has sparked a lot of debate about India's strategic autonomy, the concept of strategic autonomy. Why? Because we are maintaining good relations with both East and West, and that's why there is a debate over India's policy of strategic autonomy. And in fact, American officials are openly criticizing India's close ties with Russia. Right? So West imposed a lot of sanctions when Russia invaded Ukraine. And despite West imposing a lot of sanctions on Russia, Russia has been performing well in the economic sphere. So why? Because now India has been purchasing a lot of energy from Russia. So India and China have helped Russia to escape the sanctions imposed by the West. So because of India and China, so these sanctions imposed by the West on Russia were not that much impactful, not that much effective, right? So the debate has been highlighting the challenges and also the imperatives for India to maintain its independent foreign policy in a rapidly changing global order. Okay, so how this strategic autonomy, the independent foreign policy, would able to withstand the rapidly changing world order. So that particular debate centers around India's policy of strategic autonomy, if you can say it very briefly, right? So we will talk about some stress points in India-US relations. So what are the important elements of India-US relations? Particularly when we talk about, recently we can say that India has been closely engaging with US also. Trade, commerce, defense, security, Quad partnership, and both countries identified China as a challenge. So therefore there are a lot of convergence between US and India. So however, the problem is that there are discrepancies between these two countries over Russia. Why? Because US imposed sanctions on Russia when Russia invaded Ukraine. But on the other hand, India maintains friendly ties with Russia. India still procures defense, and India still have energy cooperation with Russia, importing a lot of energy from Russia. So that's where it is a concern for the US. Okay, so India has adopted a neutral stance on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So India never criticized Russia openly for what Russia did in Ukraine. So India adopted a neutral stance because it is based on its policy of strategic autonomy. And India also continued to import energy, crude oil. We continuing our energy cooperation with Russia. So that has created a friction with United States and its allies, who view this as a support for Russia. So they very often view India has been supporting Russia to escape the Western sanctions. And in fact, so India has also imported S-400 missile defense system from Russia. So that is also another concerning aspect with respect to India's ties with the US. So however, when Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi went to Moscow for his visit to Russia, a lot of Western experts have started criticizing India's visit to Russia, Prime Minister visit to Russia, because recent public comments which were made by US officials, including National Security Advisor of Russia, US and US ambassador to India. So they have highlighted the perceived inconsistencies in India's strategic partnership with the West. So they saying that there is some inconsistencies with India's strategic partnership with the West. They have been openly highlighting this. However, so India's strategic autonomy actually dates back to its policy of non-alignment. So we all knew that India also followed the policy of non-alignment movement during the Cold War times. During the Cold War times, so what was our policy? Our policy is non-alignment. We will not align either the Western Bloc or with the Eastern Bloc. Rather, we would be neutral and we would be independent. Right? So at that point of time, after the Second World War, the world was divided into two different blocks. The socialist bloc or the communist bloc and the liberal or capitalist bloc. Right? So therefore, this strategic autonomy policy dates back to India's non-alignment movement post-independence. And in fact, this policy of strategic autonomy always aimed at balancing relations with the major powers. For example, US, Russia, European countries. So we always try to balance our relations with major powers so that it could serve our national interests better rather than aligning with one single country. However, if you look at the current world order, so you can see that there is a great power rivalry that has been taking place, and in this great power rivalry, what is India's position? We need to understand this. What exactly is this? Is India's position in the great power rivalry? However, if you look at the world order, so how this world order is actually looks like? Is it a unipolar world order? Is it a bipolar world order or a multipolar world order? Right? So when I say unipolar world order, there is only one global center of power. For example, US. After the collapse of Soviet Union, so US became a superpower, and US, with the US as a superpower after the collapse of Soviet Union, so there was a unipolar world order. But during the Cold War times, there was a bipolar world order. There were two centers of power, two poles, USSR and US. But now the world has been gradually shifting towards a multipolar world order. So why multipolar world order? Because there are multiple centers of power. So US, Russia is also can be considered as a power because still it is a technological superpower, a military superpower. So we cannot undermine. And Russia, Japan, South Korea, India. So all these are multiple centers of power across the world. So therefore we can say that the world has been shifting from a unipolar world order to a multipolar one. So particularly with respect to Chinese rise, China has been rising at a tremendous pace. And even Russia's assertive military actions, we can consider that these multipolar world order or Chinese tremendous rise and Russia's assertive military actions in the Ukraine, so they are challenging the Western dominated global order. So we could say that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the global order was dominated by the West. But now the Western dominated global order is being increasingly challenged. And apart from that, so we should also talk about the a strategic balancing on the part of India. But when we have a multiple centers of power, of course we need to balance our ties with these multiple centers of power. So whenever there is a multiple centers of power, the global order would be more and more complex. However, India's policy of strategic autonomy and its essence lies in balancing this complex geopolitical landscape, and maintaining geostrategic autonomy would be the actual objective of India's foreign policy. So when we maintain our strategic autonomy, it ensures that we are not drawn into any single military alliance or any single alliance system. Right? So one thing that we have to understand it very, very clearly here, India is part of the BRICS grouping. right? So BRICS is very often viewed as it challenges the Western dominated world order. It challenges the West. But on the other hand, India also invited to the G7 summits. India also invited as a guest country in the G7 summits, right? So G7 is dominated by the most developed and industrial Western countries. So you can see that India's policy of strategic autonomy has been balancing the complex geopolitical landscape, particularly during the multipolar world order, right? So this strategic autonomy ensures that we will not be part of any single alien system, and we will engage with the multiple power centers in the multipolar world order that benefits India's interests and national priorities as well. So however, if you look at India Russia ties, so both these countries have been engaging a very close relations. So on a similar way, Russia also has a very close ties with China as well. But on the other hand, if you look at China and India relations, they are conflictual in nature because of the Chinese assertiveness in the Indian Ocean and China's aggression at the border areas. So there were border conflicts also, right? So Doklam clashes and Galwan clashes at the line of actual control. But Russia has been maintaining closer ties with China. However, India also has a close defense and energy partnerships with Russia. Okay, so it is being viewed that India's close relationship with Russia will be an opportunity to reframe Russia's bilateral ties with China. Okay, so India's ties would actually balance Russia's ties with the China. So they'll not become more too close. They'll not go too close, right? So it will balance Russia's ties with China. So however, so we need to understand the positive sum approach of the strategic autonomy. Now India always advocates multilateral global order. So this multilateral global order in the sense that a global order where multiple centers of power, there's not one or two centers of power based on which the world order is actually framed. There are multiple power centers. So the India always advocates for multilateral global order. So that would reflect the current geopolitical realities. And in fact, India also wanted to create a more representative international system. And when we talk about the example for that, United Nations Security Council, so it is not representing the current realities. In fact, it is an outdated body, but India always wanted reforms in the United Nations Security Council, not just United Nations Security Council, but several institutions of global governance. In all those institutions, India wanted reforms so that they can be more and more representative. India also view itself as the leader of the global south. So therefore, in majority of these international institutions and organizations, South America and Africa and South Asian countries do not have the proper representation, and that's why India wanted that the global organizations and institutions should be more and more representative. And in fact, when we talk about the strategic autonomy does not actually means that it's okay that we are not going into the alliances of any other country or any other group of countries. Rather, strategic autonomy should not be viewed as India's isolation from other countries. Rather, strategic autonomy actually promotes active engagement with all the centers of power. And that is very, very important in the multilateral world order. We need to engage with different centers of power rather than being viewed in an alliance with one single country or a group of countries. However, the strategic autonomy actually offers broader benefits for India. For example, India's energy trade with Russia actually helps in stabilizing global oil markets. So of course, all these Western countries are not importing or not purchasing oil from Russia, right? But on the other hand, India is one of the top consumer of oil. So therefore, India also go to the Middle East to purchase oil, and European countries also go to the Middle East to purchase oil. So oil prices would significantly increase, but India, by purchasing oil from Russia, it has been stabilizing the global oil markets, and in fact it has also been balancing the foreign policy. It balanced foreign policy can actually moderate the Russia China relations, and that could contribute to the global stability as well. So therefore a strategic autonomy would inherently benefits India, not just India, but it even benefits the current multilateral global order as well, right? So you can go through the definition of strategic autonomy. So strategic autonomy denotes the ability of the state to pursue the national interests and its ability to adopt the preferred foreign policy without being constrained in any manner by other states. So that is the definition of the strategic autonomy. So if you want, you can also go through the global south, and we have also discussed about this brand line. So that divides the developed global north with the global south. And next, very important article. So this is a very important for a prelims examination also, and for mains especially, general studies paper 2 and general studies paper 3, it is very important article, right? So recently president appointed the 16th finance commission, right? So 16th finance commission will be headed by former Niti Aayog vice chairman Aravind Pangaria. So chairman of the 16th finance commission is the former Niti Aayog chairman Aravind Pangaria. So in fact the 16th finance commission also started its work by inviting suggestions from the public on the mandate set for it by the center. Center has set a mandate for it, and based on the mandate, so this particular finance commission would started its work by inviting suggestions from public. Okay, so the latest finance commission, the 16th finance commission is the latest finance commission. It consists of 5 members including 1 chairman, was constituted in December last year by the president, and in fact the 16th finance commission is expected to submit its recommendations by October 2025, and its recommendations will be valid for 5 years starting from April 1st 2026, right? So the recommendations of the 16th finance commission will be valid from 1st April 2026, and it will submit its recommendations by 2025 October. So we will understand a briefly about the finance commission. What exactly is the finance commission? Finance commission is a constitutional body that is constituted through article 280 of the Indian constitution. Okay, so article 280 of the Indian constitution mandates the finance commission to recommend the distribution of net proceeds of the taxes between the center and states every 5 years. Now one thing that you have to understand here, this finance commission, a union finance commission constituted by the president every 5 years, right? So whatever taxes that center collects, so how those taxes have to be distributed between center and states, and that is known as the a vertical distribution of taxes, and how taxes should be distributed between different states, so that is known as horizontal distribution of taxes. Okay, so center to states, so that is known as vertical distribution of taxes, and states to states, in between states, so that is known as horizontal distribution, right? So it will be constituted under article 280 of the Indian constitution. So it decides the devolution of tax amount between center and various states and states to states. And it is a constitutional body, and it recommends how tax revenues which are collected by the central government should be distributed among the center and various states in the country, right? So that is the objective of the finance commission. And in fact, the commission is constituted typically every 5 years, or it is constituted once in every 5 years by the president. And in fact, it usually takes a couple of years to make recommendations to the center, and once it submitted its recommendations, those recommendations will be implemented by the center. Now, other thing that you have to understand, whatever recommendations the finance commission made to the center, they are not binding on the nature, right? So it just makes the recommendations, and it is up to the central government whether to accept, whether to implement such recommendations or not. However, so what is the major work of the commission, finance commission? So the finance commission actually decides what proportion of center's net tax revenue would be go to the states, right? So what proportion of the taxes would go to the states? So that is known as vertical devolution, as I have already told you, center to states. For example, imagine that the 15th finance commission has recommended that for example, 100% of the total tax collected by the center government, and center would retain 41%. Okay, so that is how actually devolution. So out of 100%, center would retain 41%, and the remaining taxes would be devolved to the state governments. For example, in this case, 59% of the taxes would be devolved to the, and within this 59%, so there are different states. So how the funds should be given to these different states? So this is just an example, right? So how these funds would be devolved to the different states. Okay, so that's how the vertical devolution of taxes and horizontal devolution of taxes would be decided by the finance commission, which is appointed every 5 years by the president. Okay, so when we talk about the horizontal devolution of funds between different states, so it is actually decided based on the formula, so that is created by the commission, and that actually takes into account state's population, fertility levels, income level, and even the geography of that particular state. So all these factors will be taken into consideration when it comes to the horizontal devolution. For example, there are states like Karnataka, Telangana, Gujarat, Maharashtra, right? There are different states, but it would be not appropriate to give the same amount of allocations to all the states. For example, there are also other poor states such as Rajasthan, UP, and Bihar. So since these states are poor, so there is a need for the more devolution for such poor states. So this devolution of centers funds, centers taxes to the states would be decided by the state's population. So higher population, so that particular state would receive higher devolution, and based on fertility rate, income level, and geography, so everything would decide the devolution, and that particular devolution is known as horizontal devolution, distribution of the taxes between different states. However, the vertical devolution of funds are not based on any such objective formula. So unlike the horizontal devolution, because vertical devolution just simply means the devolution of funds from center to all states, So that is the vertical devolution. And in fact, center may also aid states through additional grants for certain schemes, so that is jointly funded by the center and even state governments also. In fact, the 16th Finance Commission is also expected to recommend ways so that could augment the revenues for the local bodies. So local bodies were created through 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts, and they also had the constitutional status, and financial autonomy of these local bodies is also very, very important. And every Finance Commission recommends the ways to augment the revenues of these local bodies, and 16th Finance Commission is also expected to recommend ways to augment the revenues of panchayats and other municipalities. However, in recent times, there is a lot of friction between center and states over the devolution of finances. Okay, so because center collects major taxes such as income tax, corporation tax, corporate tax, goods and services tax. So these are these taxes in fact yield one of the highest tax revenue to the central government. But on the other hand, if you look at the state governments, so these state governments primarily dependent on taxes which are collected from the sale of goods such as liquor, fuels, and that are beyond the ambit of GST. So therefore, center would collect more tax revenues with lesser responsibility, but on the other hand, state governments would collect less revenues with more responsibilities. So states very often argue that the financial devolutions from the center were inadequate because they have more responsibilities to fulfill, and center has been providing a very less finances, and that's where the friction actually starts between center and state governments. The states are responsible for the delivery of many services to citizens, including education, healthcare, and even police also. Okay, so they have a lot of responsibilities, but on the other hand, their revenue collection powers are very less. So that is actually one issue between center and states with respect to the financial devolution. Now, next important article is a time to make climate a part of green impact reports. So one thing that we need to understand is that climate change is a new reality. Climate change is a new reality, and climate change has been rapidly altering the existing environment. And in fact, it has been creating a worst impact on different aspects on this planet: flora, fauna, biodiversity, environmental degradation, and even the vulnerable sections have also been facing a lot of problems, such as mostly because of the disasters, the El Nino, La Nina, and frequent floods, increasing intensity of droughts, and heat wave like conditions. So all these problems are majorly due to the climate change, and we need to understand this climate change is a new reality, and we must act to prevent climate change and negative consequences of the climate change. So we will understand the context of this particular article. The context is that extreme heat and humidity actually storms that extreme heat, humidity, and storms storm surges that actually takes place because of a cyclone. Whenever there is a cyclone, and cyclone would result in storm surges, and all these disasters or all these negative climatic events causing severe and most disastrous flooding across wide areas in the urban settlements. So these urban floods that we have seen across different cities, for example Chennai, Bangalore floods, Hyderabad floods, and even recent Delhi floods, right? So it is clear that the climate change is touching the human lives, it impacting the human lives, and in fact it has also been impacting the health of human beings in number of ways. So therefore we need to identify the negative impact of the climate change on human beings, and it is the high time that we need to act on the climate change. We need to mitigate the negative effects of the climate change, and we need to protect our vulnerable sections from the negative impact of climate change. So how climate change has been emerging as one of the most serious threat? Okay, so in fact climate change, it is said that it has been threatening the essential ingredients which are important for the good health. Now what are the essential ingredients for the good health? So a clean air is required, safe drinking water, nutritious food supply is also important, and safe shelter. So all these factors, all these elements are threatened by the climate change. Okay, so they are increasingly threatened by the climate change, and that has been undermining the decades of progress in the global health that the planet has achieved, that the world or the global community has achieved so far, right? So increasing intensity of vector-borne diseases can also be associated with the climate change in these tropical areas. That is also a concern. In between 2030 to 2050, so climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths every year due to malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat related stress. So therefore we should not take climate change lightly, because climate change has a multiple challenges. So it would pose multiple challenges, and it would also threaten the health of the people, because it would lead to the additional death of 250,000 individuals. However, the direct cost to health are estimated to be between $2 to around 2 to 4 billion by 2030. Okay, so the cost of climate change and climate change induced disasters would be around 2 to 4 billion by 2030 every year. Okay, so in fact there are regions with weak health infrastructure, especially in Africa, South America, and parts of South Asia, where there's a very high population, but they have a very poor health infrastructure, and they will be vulnerable to the climate change. So if no assistance, no support is provided to such vulnerable people, so they would not be able to cope up with the negative impact of the climate change on the healthcare. So they have to face the brunt of the climate change. And in fact, the millions of people, notably women, children, and even elderly, ethnic minority people, they also had, most of the people had the pre-existing health conditions. So those living in the poverty, so they are the most vulnerable category of people. So they are most vulnerable to the negative impacts of the climate change. And in fact, due to climate change and its negative impacts on the human health, so it would also impacts the pregnant woman, and it will lead to the miscarriage and stillbirths as well. So that is also a concern. So however, we must understand the climate footprint that is created by the negative impact of the climate change. So the total amount of greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, methane, so they are considered as a greenhouse gases. So they are generated by the human actions, they are generated by the anthropogenic factors. So their concentration in the atmosphere has been rapidly increasing, and that further leads to the climate change. However, factories are being constructed, and once these factories are constructed, factories are releasing emissions into the atmosphere, especially the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And these emissions also polluting the air, and they are also increasing the global warming and causing the climate change at a faster pace. However, so when we are constructing these industries, when we are proposing any new projects, it is important that we need to have a detailed environmental impact assessment, right? So this detailed environmental impact assessment would evaluate the likely environmental impacts of a proposed project or a developmental project. So this will take into account the interrelated socio-economic, cultural, and human health impacts into the consideration before implementing a particular project, and accordingly a decision will be taken based on the environmental impact assessment. Now, what is the importance of this environmental impact assessment? So this particularly links environment with the development for environmentally safe and sustainable development. And environmental impact assessment also provides a cost-effective method to eliminate or minimize the adverse impacts of environmental projects. And in fact, it would enable the decision makers, so they could analyze the effect of developmental projects on environment and people who are living in that particular region. So in fact, India should have an appropriate law, and that will attempt to conserve gains and prevent further economic degradation due to the human activities. So such legislation and such overarching and comprehensive legislation is the need of the hour for India to protect the vulnerable people from the negative impacts of the climate change. So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.